was asked in that context, and because unfortunately Abdel Nasser was not here to be with us, was not able to be with us in person, to pick up on a few things that he has mentioned in his video as a way of just reminding us of some of the responsibilities that we all have and share as global citizens. And I'm going to try and step away from the microphone now, because this time I have a lav mic. It's my lav mic. There we go. Because I think for all of us working in the NGO sector, s'il vous plaît, si vous êtes francophone.
If you are francophones, I hope that you'll apologize me for the next few minutes. I'm going to speak only in English. If you have any questions later, I can definitely answer in French.
Those of us who work in the NGO sector, one of the questions that we are asked, probably more often than not, or one of the criticisms that we face, is that there are other problems that are worthy of our attention. I mean, I don't know for many of you how often you hear this, but I must hear this every single day when I'm dealing with various kinds of donors or the general public. People who will say to me, well, we have our own problems here at home. Why should I care about war zones in Africa or the Middle East or Asia? And along the same lines, when you look at how people within Western countries in particular, how and who and what we give to, it tends to reflect those patterns, right? Even here in Canada, less than 20% of donations each and every single year go to support international humanitarian causes, and very few countries around the world, including our own, are anywhere close to meeting the 0.7 target of contributions to official development assistance in terms of government spending that has been recommended by the United Nations Security Council. A target, and I think this is very important for the Canadians in this room, just to remember that this was a target that was set by our very own Lester B. Pearson in 1969. So more than 40 years later, even for us as Canadians, we're not standing by the very recommendations that we laid out. And in that context, and I want to pick up on what Abdel Nasser said, when he said, it is our responsibility, all of us. Sometimes that is very hard for people who have the good fortune of living in stable environments to fully recognize and appreciate, and for that to result in any type of change. And so I want to draw your attention to something that I think is very important, and it's a part of the conversation that we haven't quite dug into yet over the last 24 hours. This notion of global responsibility when it comes to war. This idea of disrupting some of the vulnerabilities that young people face. And we've talked about what many of those vulnerabilities are. But one of the things that we haven't talked about are some of the factors that contribute to those vulnerabilities, to that violence and instability. For those of us who have worked in this sector for many years, and especially those of us who work in war zones, one of the things that has confounded me over the years, and I'm sure many of you as well, is that in many contexts, and I'll go right back to when I first started working in this sector with UNICEF more than 20 years ago in Somalia during the famine. You know, one of the things that exasperated me each and every single day was that knowing what to do, and even in some cases having the resources to do it, those were not the primary challenges. The primary challenges often came down to our complete incapacity to provide those services in a lawless and unstable environment where there were mostly gangs of teenage boys who were armed with automatic rifles and who sabotaged those efforts at each and every single turn. And we heard Abdel Nasser speak a little bit about this as well, about how armed groups, militant groups, in this case ISIS, how they exploit the vulnerabilities of young people, how they arm so easily those young people and turn them into instruments of misery and destruction. You know, there is no question that one of the greatest threats to public health and to the health of adolescents all around the world right now is the ease and availability of small arms, especially automatic rifles in circulation in the world. And I'm going to ask, I know this is a smart room here, but how many Kalashnikov rifles would you estimate are in circulation in the world right now? Do you know? Anybody? How many of you think it is over 500 million? Well, you'd be about right. I mean, we sort of lost track of how many Kalashnikov rifles there are in the world. At last count, there were 200 million, but it is estimated that there are at least 2 illegally traded weapons for every legally traded weapon. And in any market in the global south, it is relatively easy, if you are someone with an agenda, to acquire those kinds of weapons. They're virtually indestructible. Many of them have been in circulation now for many decades. And it's a booming business. So on this question of global responsibility and some of the solutions that may need to be put forward if we're ever to prevent that kind of violence, instability, and bring about lasting change, we would do well to start to look at other aspects of this problem as well, and to confront, I think, more readily those assumptions that for those of us who live in comfortable environments, that violence and instability doesn't implicate us as well. And let me give you an example. I'm going to throw up on this wall, on this screen, in red, all of the countries that are currently in conflict and the number of people who have either been killed or displaced as a result of this violence. More than 40 billion people have been killed or displaced as a result of that violence. Now, some of you may say, well, hang on, 40 million people, it's a bit early for me in the morning. And some of you might say to yourselves, well, hang on, we know that there's the worst refugee crisis since World War II, and it's actually 60 million, but these are the active conflicts. And so among those current refugees that we're trying to support and assist, that will include conflicts that are technically no longer considered to be active, and yet there are still refugees from those areas. But more than 40 million people from those active conflicts. These are the countries where most of those weapons, those small arms, for example, are going to. And one of the things that you'll notice about this map is that those countries, not surprisingly, principally cluster around the global south. And I'm going to show you something else, something that tends to not get as much attention as it deserves, particularly on our side of the world. Now I'm going to show you those countries in green that are the top 20 small arms exporters in the world. So what you see from this map is that the countries that are mostly paying the price of war, where these weapons are largely ending up, 70% of all weapons sales right now in the world go to developing countries, mostly in the global south. And those profiting from that transaction reside primarily in the global north. Countries that include Canada, the UK, United States, which was responsible for half of all arms transfers in the world. And now what if we look at not just small arms, but all military spending in the world? What if you look at all arms sales? So everything, tanks, other kinds of weapons. Who does the biggest business? Do you know? United States is half. Who else? Russia, China, France, England, increasingly Germany. But 80% of all weapons that are sold in the world come from none other than the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, the P5+1. Annual worldwide military spending right now is in excess of $1.7 trillion, which is roughly $250 per person on Earth. And that is 12 times what we spend as a global community on international humanitarian assistance, on the kinds of funds that all of us in this room and our partners rely on to ensure that children and young people and women all around the world have access to health programs, to education, to water and sanitation, to human rights, and to justice. If we really want to address the climate of impunity, if we really want and really are committed to keeping young people safe around the world, if we really want to invest in a future that is not simply more war, one of the most important things that we can do is to ensure that our global policies, when it comes to the arms trade, reinforce principles of transparency and accountability and global social responsibility. War is, without a doubt, everyone's problem. And that creates an opportunity as well. Because when people say to me, well, we have our own problems here at home, and what happens in other corners of the world, that doesn't really implicate me. I can't do anything about it. War is ours as human beings. We buy it, we sell it, we spread it, we wage it. We are therefore not powerless to stop it. In fact, I think we are the only ones who can. Thank you.